The role of the refrain has often been emphasized. It is territorial, a territorial assemblage.
Flicker theory with Tadas Vinokur. Flicker theory with Tadas Vinokur.
Hello everyone, welcome to Flicker Theory Reviews. I'm your host, Tadas Vinokur. Today I will discuss a different plateau from Deleuze and Guattari's A Thousand Plateaus. The name of this plateau is of the refrain. This chapter is of particular interest to me simply because, in my opinion, refrains can come to our aid when we are trying to mobilize and generate some kind of political movement. Refrains allow us to map our space and find structural patterns in the place where we would usually see only chaos. Everything is chaotic. So, in this plateau, Deleuze and Guattari discuss three main concepts, namely milieu, territory, and rhythm, as they have a lot to do with the idea of refrain. Before we even start unpacking the idea of refrain, let's first establish the significance of these three main concepts: milieu, territory, and rhythm. Milieu, territory, and rhythm. Deleuze and Guattari describe milieu this way. A milieu is a block of space-time constituted by the periodic repetition of milieu component. Well, what does that mean exactly? Brian Masumi, the translator of A Thousand Plateaus, says that milieu is a technical term that could be described as the middle or the medium. Think of it as a dynamic block of time-space, a unit of expression which is different from others by virtue of its distinct organization. There is some kind of durational, cyclic, periodic organization within the milieu that articulates it as coalescence of directions in motion. Let's be even more blunt about this. For example, when the wind is blowing, the branches of trees are swinging and producing noise. Both wind and the branches would constitute separate milieus in this case. These milieus can transcode and interact with each other. They can interact with each other. More importantly, we have to emphasize that the wind is a milieu by virtue of the gases that are blown forwards on a large scale. And branches, or the tree, is also a milieu by virtue of its arborescent growth upwards. That is to say, both of the milieus, tree and the wind, constitute cyclical clusters of traits that make them organizational and distinct. Let's keep that idea of swinging branches in the back of our heads for now, at least. Well, what is a territory then? For Deleuze and Guattari, territory is more general of a stratum, which organizes milieus. Think of it as an act that territorializes milieus. I just described interaction between two milieus, the wind and the trees. The very act of understanding this relationship between two milieus is a form of territorialization. I focus on two milieus, the wind and the branches, when I could easily focus on many others. The energy of the sun that increases the temperature of the wind, the quality of dirt that makes up the chemical composition of the tree, and so on. There are many other milieus that I could possibly mention. So, when we introduce an index that distinguishes some milieus from others, we inevitably territorialize them. And most importantly, we force them to be expressive. They mean something. That is to say, instead of allowing milieus to function and grow on their own pace, territorialization describes them as units of expression and thereby relinquishes their functionality. Deleuze and Guattari give us an example of color in birds or fish. To quote Deleuze and Guattari, color is a membrane state associated with interior hormonal states. But it remains functional and transitory as long as it is tied to a type of action: sexuality, aggressiveness, flight. It becomes expressive when it acquires a temporal constancy and a spatial range that make it a territorial, or rather territorializing, mark. Which basically means that the color of the fish may not just be functional, but it may also territorialize the space, mark the territorial consistency. It just started raining. Talk about different milieus interacting. Again, territorialization organizes milieus by forcing them to function in an expressive, spatial way. Territory is defined by the very act of definition. There is a territory for you. Well, where does rhythm fit into all of this? Remember, I talked about two milieus, the trees and the wind. When the wind is blowing, the branches and leaves of the trees are producing noise that could be heard and interpreted as rhythmic. The swoosh noise that is produced is constantly repeated and therefore it is cyclic. Well, that's the rhythm for you. Deleuze and Guattari say rhythm is the milieu's answer to chaos. Milieus are totally relational. The trees and the wind, they interact with each other and produce rhythms. These two milieus could also interact with other milieus and produce different kinds of rhythms as well. Rhythm is what constitutes the milieu. Rhythm is the periodic constituent unit that makes milieu into a milieu and generates relationships between different other milieus. Now that we have a decent understanding of the three main concepts, milieu, territory, and rhythm, let's discuss finally the concept of the refrain, which the plateau is all about. For Deleuze and Guattari, the refrain is a territorial assemblage that is found at the intersection of chaotic forces. In other words, the refrain can mark a territory, the refrain can mark a function within that territory, and also the refrain can strengthen the territory by coalescing. In order to explain the concept of the refrain, Deleuze and Guattari present us with a couple of vignettes that should allow us to easily visualize what they're talking about. The first vignette is about a kid who's afraid of the dark. Because he's afraid, he starts singing a little ditty, a little song to himself. This song allows the child to create a calming and stabilizing center in the heart of chaos. The darkness is chaotic. Remember, the refrain marks a territory, a center within chaos. The second vignette is all about the centrality of home. When you think about home, what ideas pop into your head? For Deleuze and Guattari, home is a way to organize our space. The home is full of components that determine a center. The way people talk at home, the sounds that you hear in the kitchen or in the bathroom make up the organization of space. To go home means to territorialize a stable center, which is created by rhythms that could only appear within a house. This means that even when we are not at home, we can go home by producing certain home-specific rhythms around us. And finally, the third vignette is all about the action of leaving home. In my case, when I first left my house in order to go to college, I was forced to open my home territory to new horizons. The sounds and objects that I was used to had to be fused with the new sounds and new objects that I found in college. These new sounds, in accordance with the sounds of my home, finally established new milieus and perhaps even new territories. To quote Deleuze and Guattari, one ventures from home on a thread of a tune, along sonorous gestural motor lines that mark the customary path of a child and graft themselves onto or begin to bud lines of drift with different loops, knots, speeds, movements, gestures, and sonorities. In other words, rhythms are components of milieus that make up the refrain, or our ability to find structure within all this chaos. Rhythms are language units that communicate territories and establish centers. So, Deleuze and Guattari distinguish three main types of refrains. First, territorial refrains that assemble a territory, as they do when a child sings a little song when he's afraid of the dark. Second, functional refrains that assume a special function in the assemblage. And third, refrains that regroup and intensify the forces, as they do when a person leaves his home to find new rhythms and new milieus. The refrains begin with a child's song when he's afraid of the dark, but they definitely don't end there. When I said that the concept of refrain should be important for the contemporary political movements, I meant to say that a better capacity to establish different rhythms between different groups or milieus would allow political movements to create refrains and find structure within the chaos or darkness. With this in mind, rhythm should be emphasized as the unifying forces that put refrains into milieus, where fragmented forces can sing a somewhat similar song. Thank you for watching. See you next time.